this computer. Share. Share. Okay. So have you all been, and I mean, those of you who have interruptions in class, have you been going back to the recordings? Not yet. Okay.
Yes, doctor, I went back one time. They were perfectly well and clear.
Very good, very good. Okay, so let's start today and talk about social relations, social networks, social support, social integration, and health. So let me start by showing you actually a graph from a very famous paper from 1988. This is an old paper, but this is one of the first papers that has actually, it's sort of like at that time, people didn't do systematic reviews. The technology was not developed enough for systematic reviews. However, this is a paper by House, the last name is House, who's a sociologist. Spaghetti plot. Okay. What is a spaghetti plot? You'll tell us in a minute. But this is, House is actually a sociologist at the University of Michigan. And he looked at the few papers in the United States that have looked at social integration and mortality, irrespective of how social integration was measured. In some of the studies, social integration was measured as number of people in the person's social network. If I know 20 people versus if Antoine knows 2 people only in their social network. Sometimes social integration was measured as being married, for example. So this idea that married people in the context of the US were perceived to be more socially integrated compared to single people. Sometimes there were more qualitative measures of social integration. Sometimes church membership, for example, is, or whether the person goes to church every week was used as the measure of social integration. And then they looked at the relationship between social integration, level of social integration, so they looked at the level of social integration from low to high, and they looked at age-adjusted mortality. Okay, the correlation between the level of social integration and age-adjusted mortality. And in these few studies, and these studies were actually, some of them were longitudinal studies. So they followed people up for 10 years or 15 years and looked at, I mean, not some of them, they had to be, they all had to be longitudinal studies because they measured social integration and then they followed a cohort and basically recorded who died and who didn't die. And what you see here, if you follow the lines, this is, sorry, this is not only in the United States. So this is Eastern Finland, but these are, you know, Evans County, Alameda County, Tecumseh are all in the US. And what you see is a downward trend, downward sort of a linear trend, where with higher social integration, age-adjusted mortality is lower in the United States. Irrespective of this limitation where you have different studies measuring social integration differently, and irrespective of whether you think marriage is a really good measure of social integration, whether church membership or going to a church or a religious or participating in religious activities is a measure of social integration. You know, irrespective of the measure, irrespective of where the study was done, and other methodological issues, almost all of the studies show this linear downward trend, and you can see it this way, basically this red line going from high mortality when social integration is low, and then mortality goes down when social integration increases. Okay. So this is what we are going to talk about today, is social integration as a broad umbrella for other measures like social networks, social support, the quality of the social networks, the quantity and the quality of the social networks, and their relationship at the end. Ultimately, our concern here is health outcomes. Mortality being the most objective measure of health, whether the person is alive or dead, is, you know, mortality or age-adjusted mortality. And also on the other end of the life course, infant mortality or neonatal mortality. These are some of the the most objective measures of health that people look at in many studies. Okay, so the article starts with, and Lisa Berkman is a social epidemiologist, and social epidemiologists are usually trained in sociology, very well trained in sociology, and, you know, would have read Weber and Durkheim and other philosophers and sociologists and their writings. In fact, for a long time, I've been wanting to read this book by Durkheim, and the title of the book is Suicide. It's supposed to be a capital letter. It's a book called Suicide, and it's basically a sociological analysis of suicide, and, you know, what are the factors that lead to suicide, which countries have higher rates of suicide and why. It's very high level sociological analysis of suicide. And I think it's very relevant for the context of Lebanon, because in the past year or so, there have been some very a couple of cases of suicide that were covered quite a bit in the media. And we have an NGO in Lebanon called Embrace. And actually the Embrace coordinator and director are graduates from our program, particularly the Health Promotion and Community Health Department. So there's been a lot of talk about suicide. So it's really important to think about suicide in the context of Lebanon. But Durkheim's study was in Europe, of course. And it's a comparative sociological study. And his argument is that, and by the way, you may think this is, you know, of course we know, you may say, of course we know this, but when the book came out, this was really sort of groundbreaking type of research or analysis. And basically his thesis is that, his name is, it's a he, Emil Durkheim, and his thesis is that suicide is not about individual pathology. Suicide is a function of social dynamics. Suicide reflects the relationships or the organization in any society. And suicide changes across cultures, differs across cultures, and suicide can change over time. So some cultures or countries that have very low levels of suicide can, over time, experience increasing levels of suicide, such as was what happened in Eastern European countries, for example, in the 1980s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union. All of a sudden, there are some health outcomes like alcoholism, like depression, and also suicide that have increased in a span of 10 years following the collapse of the Soviet Union. So the idea here is that this act of ending one's life, which we used to frame as a very personal psychological act, and an indication of individual pathology, and actually to some extent Embrace presents it this way in Lebanon. And you know, they of course Embrace and people who work very, you know, very well trained, well-intentioned people who work with Embrace acknowledge that there are social factors that contribute to a final decision of the person to end their life, but they focus a lot on pathology, that there is pathology, and if you can just call us, we will help you. We will provide you with psychological support to help you through that difficult phase in life. So, so they're like it's important not to think in extremes, not to think that suicide is completely sociological. It's a completely sociological event or an outcome of social organization and has nothing to do with the psychological pathology or the person's psychology. And it's also, I would completely disagree with the position that suicide is about a psychological or a psychiatric pathology, because then it doesn't really explain why a large number of people who have psychological pathologies don't commit suicide, but then when social changes happen, then suicide increases. So the paper argues, not Durkheim's book, but the paper by Berkman and her colleagues argues that rapid changes, social, economic, political changes can lead to deregulation of values and beliefs and general norms in any community. Sometimes displacement can lead to that, where values and norms in a community change because of displacement. What people used to completely reject before displacement, after displacement, because of the dramatic social change and the dramatic increase in feelings of insecurity, they would make them accept things that they didn't use to accept in the past. So this is one of the basically lines of sociological writings that are really important to read, to think about, and to grasp in our understanding of social relations and social support and their relationship with health. The other line of scholarship or writings that the article starts by summarizing or describing is the work by psychologist Bowlby. And I don't know if any of you come from a psychology background, if they've read on the theories of attachment and child development.
Yes, doctor.
Okay, yes. Can you tell us a little bit, Frank, about that?
Yeah, it is attachment, and it starts right from childhood. It looks at the way how the infants are attached to their primary caregivers. So in this case, a child, when a child is born, the immediate person who's there, especially they always look at the mother of the child, and the children always get attached to their mothers. So if there is a strong attachment, I mean, if the mother is always there and the child is attached to the mother, there is a strong bond that is created, and that one gives a child a safe space, sort of like a safe environment for the child to explore and understand the world. But if there is not that bond, then the child is likely to feel insecure. The child may not be able to explore and understand how the world is like. And this one goes right from the childhood. If it depends on the type of attachment that you have, that is created in childhood, and it goes through into adulthood, and it affects you. So there was an example whereby when we have delinquents, children who go ahead and start and they are antisocial, it depends on how they were brought up during their adulthood. For example, if the mother was not always there, then the child could actually find the ways of how to navigate into the world by themselves, and they end up being antisocial like that. So, yeah.
Okay, that's great. Yes, absolutely. So that's basically the theory of attachment. The idea is that infants or babies, when they are born, thank you very much, Frank, that they need attachment as much as they need food and warmth. So it is just as important for the child's development and even physiological growth to have attachment. It is just as important as having food, basically, for their growth and development. And there have been, actually really unfortunate, again, ethically, very ethically questionable studies that have been done on children, on babies in orphanages that have, basically developed this theory of attachment, because babies in orphanages do not have, are not attached to a mother figure or to a primary care giver. And some research has been done on these babies to develop this theory of attachment. Okay, great. So this is basically the idea that attachment to an adult caregiver provides safety and is extremely beneficial and important for both the physical and also the psychological development of a child in infancy and in childhood. Then there are also ideas about attachment in adulthood, that even as adults, I see something in the chat, right? Or did someone raise her hand? Dana, yes, go ahead, Dana.
I have a question. And is there a difference between if the child has his mother or a different caregiver? Does it matter? And is there a difference if it's not his mother?
I mean, a child, like an infant, wouldn't know if this is you mean the biological mother?
Yeah, biological mother, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think, I mean, it's not biological. It's not a biological. It's about a child having feeling safety, that there is somebody that they can always attach to.
And it has to be an individual, not مثلا in an orphanage. They're maybe taken care of, but there are too many people. Maybe is it this? I'm just asking. There has to be at least one person that they are attached to.
I mean, some of the research that was done on children in orphanages or babies in orphanages is that they wouldn't touch them. Like they, there's this idea of touching the baby, that's, I mean, I don't know. If like touching promotes brain growth, or I'm not very familiar with these writings. However, the research, the problematic research, I don't mean to say problematic, the unethical research that was done on babies is that they would leave them without any touch for a long time in orphanages. And then they would like basically observe their behavior, the baby's behavior. Now, okay, you've read also in the article this research that's done on rodents, when rodents are born. So handling that, rodents who are handled at a very young age are able to basically cope with stress. If they're later on in life, I don't know how old the rodents, what is the age span of the rodents, how long they live, but later on in their life, if they are subjected to stress, those who were handled or touched when they are young, they're able to handle stress and cope with it better than those who are not handled. And then there's also this research about cognitive decline. So again, being handled in infancy, it slows down the process of cognitive decline. And the idea that any research that you carry out on rodents who are mammals, then you would think it may apply to human beings as well, because we are mammals as well. Okay? Okay.
Yes.
Any other comments or feedback on this? If anybody knows about this more than I do.
I just want to add something about suicide. Because I did a study about a group of preschoolers, or actually schoolers between 9 and 13. And I came across some misconceptions between a suicidal attempt and a non-suicidal attempt, or what we call a self-injurious attempt.
Sure.
So basically, suicidal ideation is defined as a possessing a passive thought to be dead. Okay, So this is an idea that I want to be dead, followed by a suicidal plan. Then the suicidal plan, it's followed by a preparatory act, and then a suicidal attempt. The attempt can be deadly, يعني the intention is death, or the individual might go into a non-suicidal self-injurious behavior just to seek attention and to achieve something. Suicide itself is death, يعني it's defined as death.
Sure.
And we reported it at small ages, يعني between 8 and 13.
Sure.
But because we did not have the ability to psychologically diagnose it as a suicidal ideation, we just reported it as intentional poisoning. It was about poisoning with drugs or medication. So
Okay.
it's just an additional comment.
Yeah. I've come across this in my research actually, and at the beginning I was very scared because this happened with adolescent girls, where they would engage, like basically there were girls who engaged in exactly what you said, non-suicidal self-harm. And it's cutting the skin with the razor, for example, or burning the skin. And sometimes it's to get attention, but other times it's not for the purpose of getting attention, because they hide it. The girls hide it. So I've of course, like going into this without a background, I got really scared at the beginning, but then I saw that there's so much literature on non-suicidal self-harm, and that I spoke with a psychiatrist, a psychiatrist who has like a very good progressive feminist perspective. And apparently this is something that is common among adolescents. I just got very scared because I wasn't prepared for it. But nonetheless, it is, I mean, it's not something to be taken lightly, of course, but it's very different than suicide. It is a psychiatric issue to deal with, but it's not the type of like reaction where I need to get this girl immediately and take her to a psychiatrist against her will, against her parents' will. It requires a lot more understanding and a social progressive approach rather than a pathological, you need to be diagnosed and see a psychiatrist type of solution immediately. Yes, Melody?
Yes, doctor, I wanted to say, like, if they were actually prepared to commit the suicide, they are less likely to do it. Is this true? Because they are thinking about it. They are not just committing suicide immediately without thinking. So I was a bit surprised about what Mahmoud just said, that
No.
people who want to commit suicide, they actually prepare for it.
Yes, yeah. So it is more dangerous if the person has a plan. If an adolescent tells you, I have a plan, I have the medicine, my mom's medicine, I stole my mom's medicine and put it in my bedroom, or I read about how to take poison, or things like this. If they have a plan, then it is more dangerous. But if also it's important to take seriously these thoughts. I wish I was dead, because that's also, even if it's not suicidal ideation, if it's something that particularly young people hear adults saying, and they just repeat it, it is an indication of poor mental health and depression, and it needs to be addressed as well. Yeah, my point is not to take anything that is not suicide lightly, but to like think more socially about it, rather than think of it as let's just diagnose this and send it to a psychiatrist. It requires more understanding and more of a social approach to it.
May I add an additional thing?
Yeah.
And we live in a conservative community, whether in Lebanon or in the Middle East. What we see is the tip of the iceberg, and you might find a survivor of a suicidal attempt arriving to the emergency department, suffering from a drug toxicity or overdose. But once this is over and once everything settles, the clinical part, and the clinicians suspect it's a suicidal attempt, they refer the family to a psychiatrist But that's it. Nobody follows up on the referral. There is no guarantee that it will be referred because it's a taboo to talk about suicide in conservative communities,
Sure.
especially if it's
Sure.
a teenage or a girl or a lady.
Yeah, because it's stigmatized. I mean, suicide is also seen as the more extreme form of like an extreme form of poor mental health and depression. So, and mental health, I mean, talking about mental health is not, people don't openly talk about mental health or do not openly seek support for mental health. It's more like it's something that is hidden. So a lot of the families that we work with refused to actually be referred to like a social worker. And some of the girls, when we start to ask them, like they would say, I wish I was dead, or I tried to cut myself. Or it was something stupid, but I wanted to throw myself out the window. Or, I mean, they would say things like this. And when we start to probe and ask more, the girl starts to get nervous when she sees that we are serious, we're asking her serious questions, and she retracts. She says, no, that's not what I meant. Oh, it was stupid. Don't worry about it. I mean, because they're afraid that, you know, the type of serious questions we're asking, the girl starts to be afraid that we're going to talk to her parents. So she retracts and says, no, it's not serious.
Doctor?
Yes.
For example, in our country, and I noticed here also, it's religiously not acceptable to
Yes.
to suicide. So even talking about it, it's a no way, no. They just don't want to imagine that it's an option in my country. But I saw some a family here. It was the same thing. They didn't even talk. I mean, I heard they talk about a history, family history, and I was like, oh, but it could be a suicide, and they were like shocked and oh no way, no, because the religious people.
Yes, I mean, suicide or harming oneself is, you know, is considered to be haram, right? So then families don't want to admit it. If a member of the family commits suicide, then they will say it was an accident, it was not suicide. Yeah. So that
Exactly.
also adds to the stigma and the hiding and not addressing the issue. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, yeah. Okay, so what I wanted to actually, I don't know if this is a good point, but I wanted to make sure that you are okay, you're all okay, because I actually feel that the lockdown and the COVID is starting to get to me now. I mean, I didn't feel that way before. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I wanted to just ask for, have like a couple of polls for you. Just very, it's not about the reading or anything, but let me see the first poll. And this, I'm not asking you personal questions. This is related to your studying and related to the program here. I'm going to launch this poll, but it's about the stress you're experiencing and how you're coping with it as students learning online in the context of COVID and lockdown. So what are some of, you can select more than one answer. And I think this is anonymous, but anyways, even if it's not anonymous, I don't even know how to get who answered what. So what are some of the learning activities that cause you stress? I'm launching the poll here. What are some of the things that cause you stress? Everybody answered? Okay. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Okay, so good. Thankfully, I don't have exams. There are no exams for this course, but writing is the second source of stress in the learning process. And unfortunately, there is writing in this course. Actually, very soon, I will give you the guidelines for the final paper, so you get more than a month to work on it. Good to know that only 2 of you think that speaking in class is stressful. Memorizing, okay. One person said other. I don't know if that person wants to talk because that will identify who said other. Anyways, okay, so writing is a stressful activity. I'm a slow writer. I enjoy writing, but I'm a slow writer, but I can see how it can be stressful for students because you don't, I can write any time I want, I can take as long as I want in writing, but when you have like deadlines as a student, when you have to submit a paper, that can be stressful. But the other things, like I don't expect any students to memorize. And I don't have exams, and I do understand that this is a stressful time, right? And that's why the answers are the way they are. Okay, so I'll stop sharing. I have another poll, not relaunch poll one, no. I have another one, which is, which one? Second one, okay. Okay, so this one is about what are some of the coping mechanisms you use to de-stress? One more. One person didn't vote. Okay. Okay. Share results. Okay, so chatting with friends, but it seems like you exercising, cooking, reading hopefully outside readings, novels or poetry or something. Okay, so I hope you get time to do these things, and I think you should make time at least, in between classes, because it's really important to really try to de-stress this time. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you get burnt out and then this will affect everything. It'll be like a domino effect. If you're burnt out, then it's like a vicious cycle. You get more stressed, more burnt out, more stressed. Okay. I don't know if this helped you, but at least it gave me some ideas about you, about what you're experiencing. So, okay, going back to the content of today's class. This is work by Dr. Abla Sibai, who is currently our dean in the faculty, but this work is probably from 10 years ago that she conducted. And some of you know that, some of you may know that her work has been, her career has been on aging, and she basically founded the University for Seniors program at UB. And she also does some work on chronic diseases and old age. So this is actually really important work because it dispels some of the myths that we have about the family in our context and the social support that we get, and this notion that the family takes care of everything and everyone, and there's no need for government-sponsored services. Because even if there were services, culturally people will not use them, will reject them because they want to rely on the family for support. So what this work showed is that, in fact, there's a quite a significant proportion of women over the age of 65 who live alone in Lebanon, in our society. This is from some data that was collected from there's a study that was done before I started working at AUB called the Urban Health Study. And they collected data on adolescents, on women of reproductive age, and on older adults. And from the data on older adults, it was found, I didn't want this yet. It was found that 6.2% of elderly Lebanese men live alone, but then 17, almost 3 times more elderly Lebanese women live alone. Would anybody want to think why this is the case?
We can check the life expectancy. Probably the women lives longer than men.
Okay, yes, absolutely. Because women live longer. Men die earlier, women live longer. Okay, so women live longer, that's one reason. There's another reason. Women spend more years as, single in old age, widows in old age, not single. Whereas men, if their spouses die, it is more likely that they will marry in old age. Whereas women, it's a lot less likely that a woman would marry again after her husband dies. Okay? Yes, so Dana, men marry after they lose their spouses, absolutely. So this is the reason why there are more women in any society, not only in Lebanon, who live alone compared to men. And this notion that older adults don't live alone in our culture because of religion, because of the family, is not very much supported in the data. The data shows that 17.3% of women over age 65 do live alone. Okay. Then what the study also showed is that rich Lebanese elderly are more likely to live alone, and poor Lebanese elderly are more likely to live with one of their married children. Okay, so economics is also a factor, not only a gender. So older adults who can afford to live alone will live alone. So this whole thing of our culture, older adults will live with their children, and that's how it is, again, is not supported, because those who have financial means will opt out of that so-called culturally normative arrangement and would want to live alone. On the other hand, those who don't have the resources then are more likely to live with an adult child, and most likely a married adult child, and most likely the male adult child, because it's his wife who provides care for his parents. Okay, what do you think it can be some of the relationships between living arrangements in old age and health? Or what are some of the health outcomes associated with living arrangements in old age? Like what type of, if you were doing research, what type of what are the topics, the research topics where you think, I want to know if the person lives alone or not? Reem.
Yes, doctor, I think depression is a very important aspect we should look at, because we know that for me, and from personal experience, I see that old adults, when they become like elderly, they start to be like kids. They need affection, they need the surrounding, they need to see this support.
Okay, so mental health in general, you said depression, and here Melody and Mahmoud wrote depression, Alzheimer, loneliness, trauma. Okay, Fatima, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I also wanted to say something about the mental health, but I think it depends on the elderly preference. some might find that living with their children is better for their mental health, and some prefer to live alone.
Sure.
And this comes from me asking several elderly about it. Again, we can also discuss the physical health, whether they are eating healthy diet, taking their medications, going to their appointments. I think the living arrangement affects that too.
Okay, very good, very good. So then also Dana wrote NCDs, so physical health as well, not only depression and mental health. And the point about it depends on whether the older adult wants to live alone or not, makes a big difference as well, because sometimes older adults who end up living with their children are not happy about that. They don't have privacy. Sometimes they end up, sleeping in the same room with kids. Sometimes they lose their autonomy when they're living with their children. They can't make decisions on their own. The children make their decisions for them. And that can be very stressful and impact their mental health negatively. So it's really about the situation and the context. Remember, the context is the most important thing. Okay, it depends if the older adult, absolutely. So yes, when we talk about living with children, in some cases, both, the two spouses move in and live with the child, or the child is living with them and they grow older. But in many cases as well, either the older man or the older woman end up living with one of their children after the spouse dies, so that they don't stay alone. And physical abilities of elderly declines, which makes them feel like a burden on others. Yes, absolutely. It's all about context. Oops. Okay. So these are some of the studies that I'm actually interested in. I'm interested in this idea of fear of falling. And this is an area of research that there are a lot of articles on older adults and fear of falling. If an older adult starts to be afraid of moving and going to the kitchen and taking a shower by themselves, or going to get their groceries because they're afraid of falling, this actually impacts their well-being, their ability to take care of themselves and their well-being a lot. So the living arrangement here is whether they live alone or live with others is an important factor. Food insecurity, those of you who are in public health nutrition, as you know, in old age, there is research on nutrition, on loss of muscle weight, on food security that comes with aging. And basically, again, living alone or living with another older adult, or children is an important factor. And then, of course, depression, mental health outcomes, but particularly dementia and Alzheimer, which some of you mentioned in the chat. Okay. Anything else that you can think of related to living arrangements and how they impact health outcomes?
Doctor, can I add something?
Yes. Go ahead.
It's something I saw a lot in my work, and I was really shocked of the amount of neglect. I've seen older adults with bed sores, like some weigh 30 kilograms, they don't eat. Some have scars, they've been beaten because they cannot go to the toilet. And I used to work in one of the most expensive hospitals and most prestigious hospitals in Lebanon. It's not only about the economic status, but I've seen a lot of neglect and abuse, and we cannot talk about it. We cannot talk about it.
What do you mean by hospital? Because also in Lebanon, nursing homes sometimes are called hospitals, although they're...
No, I meant like the regular hospital, everybody knows. Yes, regular admissions, or it's a hospital. Yes, we've seen a lot. I remember a woman, they used to take her to the hospital like every 2 weeks, even though she's okay. They just want her to sleep at the hospital and leave her there. she also died, and nobody came to see her.
Mm.
And they won't accept if you ask anything about her. They start like screaming, and we really take care of her. I've seen a lot. I didn't expect that in a context where they always talk about like being good for, and kind with
Sure.
older adults. It's really horrible. I think
Yeah.
also neglect and abuse should be addressed.
So yes, elderly abuse and elderly neglect, even if it's not active abuse, but it's neglect, is presence in all cultures, everywhere. And, you know, this whole, I mean, what I'm trying to do is really, and in some of my work, because I also do some work on aging, not a lot, but this idea of the family takes care of everything, and that's the most ideal situation. It's a myth, and it needs to be dispelled, because particularly as the family structure changes, and as women no longer take care of their in-laws, and Antoine mentioned something here. So I definitely do not agree with blaming paid caregivers, particularly women who are hired as domestic workers, but who end up being in a situation where they have to bathe an older person, feed them. Sometimes if they have advanced Alzheimer's, the domestic worker doesn't know how to deal with it, or even the child, the adult child of the person doesn't know how to deal with it. It is a situation where there's stress on the family. There are limited resources that are provided by the government, by the state, and then the older adult gets basically stuck in that situation where they are neglected, or they're even actively being abused physically or emotionally, or so Isaac, so in high HIV/AIDS affected areas, most orphans and vulnerable children live with their grandmothers, and this puts too much pressure on the physical and mental health of the elderly. Yes. So here the older adults take care of the children, because you have a generation that was lost in the middle because of the HIV/AIDS. A lot of children are taken care of by their grandparents. So the grandparents want to retire, want to, rest, and then all of a sudden they're raising a new generation. A positive experience I had with my grandma after my grandpa died. She became very isolated and less talkative. After that, she had a back surgery, so she stayed with us to take care. Although she refused to stay for long and had attachments to her own house, but she became very much social and expressive again. Okay, so you also volunteer, Sarah, in a first aid team where you provide social support, expose terrible cases where old women are abandoned by their children that traveled abroad and never asked or sent money. Yeah, there are these cases. There are these cases in society where old people are abandoned and they feel very lonely. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to our famous conceptual model here. Our famous conceptual model where we have this direct relationship that goes from social structural factors, either the underlying social structural factors or how these social structural factors manifest in terms of measures of social position like education and income and occupation, whether the person's social position at birth, which is their parents' social position, and also in childhood, or their social position in adulthood. So this direct relationship, which I think we called pathway 1 or pathway 2. Anyways, one of the pathways that comes directly from social structure or social structural arrangement and impacts health. And then we have this other pathway. That's pathway 1, the top one. Okay. And then the other pathway, I'm trying to get my spotlight. So the other pathway, which goes through behaviors. So the social structural arrangements then influence people's behavior. So people who have resources behave in certain ways or are able to change their behavior and have more behavioral control, which impacts their health. positively. And then people who have less resources have less risk perceptions, they have less knowledge, they have less behavioral control, all of the things that, all of the constructs that we discussed over the past few weeks, and that would negatively impact their health. Let's see if we can integrate into this model social networks. How would we integrate social networks? Okay, and this is similar to the model that is in the paper, in the article by Lisa Berkman, where the article presents this conceptual model, we'll go over it now, where you have socioeconomic and political structures, such as the governance, the financial policies, the social policies, whether there are services provided to people in old age, whether there are services provided to women, daycare centers, child daycare centers, so that women can work, can participate in the labor force, the social constructions of gender, masculinity and femininity in any social society, and then the cultural values as well. These social structures combined influence the characteristics or the availability of positive social networks and social relations. So social relations are similar if you want to think about self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is not something that people are born with or that drops on them from the sky. That it's not that some people have high self-efficacy and others have low self-efficacy. There are factors in the social structure that in fact determine how much self-efficacy a person can draw upon. And similarly here, there are factors in the social and the economic structure that actually can promote good social integration, social embeddedness, and positive extensive social networks. And there are factors that in fact break social networks. There are social policies that can be enacted in different countries that break social networks, such as, you can think about the United States. There are sometimes social policies related to forcing women to go to work for minimum wage, for example, that in fact make them unable to provide childcare for their sisters, for their daughters, for their neighbors. So if all the women are forced to go out, all the women who live in poverty are told, you are no longer going to get any support from the government. You all have to go out and work. And the only jobs that you can get are minimum wage jobs where you have to work 60 hours a week and you can barely afford to pay your rent. Now, these women then will have to go out and work in these very low wage jobs and can no longer provide childcare to other women in their family to be able to go out and work. So this type of policy breaks social support and social networks and can lead to negative health outcomes. Okay, it can lead to negative health outcomes either directly, okay, or it can lead to negative health outcomes through influencing people's behavior. So disrupted social network arrangements, decrease in social support can, let's say, push some people to engage in negative behaviors like alcoholism, like delinquency, engaging in an antisocial behavior, which would negatively impact their health. Okay. So this model is really an adaptation of our original model. Our original model is basically social structure, behavior, and health outcomes. And is the relationship direct from the social structure to health, or does it go through behaviors, which is the model that we followed in the last few weeks when we were talking about individual level behaviors, psychosocial behaviors, behavioral theories, where we focused on this part of the model of how we can change behaviors in order to improve health. Okay, now we go back a little bit and we think about social networks as an important element in this conceptual model. So this is the framework that Berkman and her colleagues presented. It's just a more sophisticated model than the previous slide. It's the social structural conditions, which she calls macro level or upstream factors. And I'm sure you've used this language: upstream, downstream, distal, proximal, macro, and micro. Okay. So the macro level, the structural level, and the most distal level are these social structural conditions in any society, in any community, or you can say in any country. Okay. Now, between the structural, which are the macro, and the more micro, and we talk about here social support rather than behaviors, or even behaviors are even more micro than social support mechanisms, there's what's called the meso level. The meso, you can spell it M-E-S-O, or you can spell it M-E-Z-Z-O, Z-Z-O. Okay, and that's the social networks in any society. Social structural conditions, which are related to policies, economic arrangements, politics, any form of social change that is going on in the society or in the country. Then you have the social networks, which are the meso level. The meso basically links the macro to the micro. So in sociological writings, there's also always this deficiency of, or this deficient debate of whether it's the structure or the individual. Remember, we talked about that in a couple of weeks ago. The structure versus the individual, or society versus the individual, structure versus agency. Agency is an individual basically making decisions, their own decisions. And here we're saying that there has to be a meso level that links the structural, the macro, with the micro. And that meso level is really the characteristics of the social networks that individuals are embedded in, and this social network structure is an outcome of the structural arrangements in the society. Okay. And that then links to the micro level, and we will talk about each one of these, the mechanisms and the pathway in the upcoming slides. And these mechanisms and pathways at the end link with health outcomes. So the upstream factors are more the social structural conditions and the social network structures that are also outcomes of the social structure. But they're more meso level. They're not similar to policies at the state level. They are the social networks that the individual is embedded in. So it's meso. And then the micro are how these social networks operate at the individual level. That's the micro level. Okay. Let's try to provide some examples or talk more concretely about this. Okay. So what is, if we say social network structure, what is it? If I ask any of you, what is your social network structure? Can you describe it to me? Reem?
It can be our family, our friends, our neighborhood even, or the people we do. For me, the people I do volunteering with them, they are a very important part of my social network.
Okay.
Even my friends at university, my colleague.
Okay. Okay, so each one of us can describe his or her own social network. I can say my social network is extensive. I have so many friends. I know so many people through the volunteer work I do. I have a big family. Okay, someone else may say, I have a small social network. I only have 2 or 3 people that I interact with on an intimate, on a like personal, intimate level. And everyone else in my social network are, everyone else are acquaintances. They're not people that are close to me. Sometimes with immigration, for example, when people leave their, you know, people live in one place for 20, 25 years and then they immigrate. I mean, now with technology and phones and WhatsApp and everything, things are different. But immigration can completely change, overhaul the social network structure of individuals. Okay. So there's a way of looking at the characteristics or describing a social network. There's a quantitative way and a qualitative way. And that's called I mean, the article mentions a couple. They mention research by Tony Antonucci, and then they mention some research by Lynn, a researcher called Lynn, which have worked a lot and published a lot, have done a lot of research and published on how to basically describe a social network in terms of its characteristics and in terms of its functions as well, not only in terms of its characteristics. One that is developed by Tony Antonucci, also from the University of Michigan. I know her actually personally. It's called the Convoy Model of Social Relations. And let me show you, it's complex and its measurement is complex, but it's very simple in how it is presented to people. If I show you, oops, that's not what I wanted to show you. If I show you this, I think there's a slide missing because there should be a slide missing. Forget about the left side of this. If I show you this pictorial presentation, and I tell you, you are in the middle of these concentric circles. This looks like the ecological, social ecological model a bit. But if you are here in the middle, and I ask you, in this first circle, I would like you to list all the people in your life that you cannot imagine living without. Just think silently to yourself. If you want, you can jot down on a piece of paper. List all the names of people. I'm not going to see this, so you can jot down names and all the names of people who are very important in your life that you cannot imagine living without in this first circle. Okay, even if you're not done, if I go then up one level and I say this is another level where I would like you to list the names of people that are important for you, but not as important as those who are in the first circle. They are part of your social network, but you don't have like the relationship, the intimate relationship with these people to the point where you would say, I cannot live with that person. These are people who are important in your life, but there's no intimate relationship with them. And I don't mean intimate romantic, but like you can have an intimate relationship with your mother, with your sister, meaning like close and emotional, not necessarily romantic. Okay, and then if I go up to this third circle and I say, okay, now list all the people that you would consider acquaintances. They can be your neighbors, they can be your work colleagues, they can be I wouldn't give examples because sometimes people would put their spouse in the third circle. Okay. Okay, so when people do this, when you give this, graph to people, this diagram, and then you ask them these questions, after they complete this exercise, you can get a lot of information out of this. First, you want to get basically the size of the social network. The size meaning how many people did the person list. There are some people who literally list one person in the first circle, and there are people who list more than 10 people in the first circle. And you have to let them do this. You know, you cannot intervene and say, oh, that's enough, I don't have more time, you need to finish. You can't do that. They need to take their time completing this. So that gives you a sense of the size of the social network. Following this exercise, you start to ask specific questions. Some of these questions are quantitative, meaning the people that you listed in your first circle, do you live with them? Do they live with you in the same household? Do they live in the same town? Do they live in the same country? So that's a measure of proximity. And of course, I mean, the idea is that a social relationship that is more proximal can offer more than a social relationship that is distant. I mean, in theory, doesn't have to be the case. The other thing is that you can get is homogeneity, meaning are people in your social network, are they people who are like related to you by blood? My son, my daughter, my sister, my mother? Or are you listing in your social network neighbors, friends, co-workers, people of different classes, people of different ethnic groups? It makes a difference whether your social network is very homogeneous, it's people who are very close to you and look, you know, are very similar to you culturally and socially, or if you have a social network that is more diverse, it makes a difference. Okay, so that's how you measure quantity. There are also other questions related that are more quantitative. But then you can also pick a number of people that the person listed. You can pick the first person, the first name that the person listed, and you can ask qualitative questions about this person. You can ask questions related to the intimacy of the relationship. Again, not necessarily a romantic relationship, but intimacy in the relationship between mother, if the person mentioned their mother in the first circle, how close are you to your mother? And then you can ask questions related to the quality of the relationship. I feel I'm very close to my mother emotionally. My mother cares about me. My mother listens to me when I need to talk. You know, these are like measures of the quality of the relationship. It's not just about listing the mother in the first circle, but it's also about the quality of the relationship with the mother. If there's caring, if there's like a type of social support that this relationship is offered. And also you can tap or you can gauge reciprocity, whether I provide care to my mother and my mother provides care to me. Okay. So this is the convoy of social relations and the way it is measured. But let me go back to a couple of slides and say that this model, in the way it is structured and in the way that the questions are formulated, and the questions can be modified because I've used some of them. I'll show you some data in a little bit. You can basically measure the structure of the social network of the person. And that structure is about the size, the density, how bounded the relationships are, the proximity, if the people in the social network are close physically or not, homogeneity, again, I mentioned that, and reachability, meaning if you need someone today, Let's say I get arrested and I go to jail. Can I reach someone who's in my social network immediately or not? Then through this convoy of social relations, you can obtain information about the frequency of the contact with the person, reciprocity, which is more qualitative, multiplicity, I'll talk about it in a minute, and intimacy. Multiplicity means whether the relationship offers emotional support, instrumental support, financial support, different types of support. So I can have one person in my social network, but I can borrow money from them. I think that they care for me and I can talk to them anytime I want. If I need information, I trust them, I call them and I ask them, which doctor should I go to? Or I have these symptoms, what do you know about that? What should I do? So if one person can offer me these three types of social support, then I would describe that relationship as multiplex. It offers more than one type of social support. Okay. Any questions about this?
It's clear, I guess.
Okay. So what is the point of going over all of this? Dana?
Doctor, it's not the answer. I just shared a link.
Okay.
When I started reading the article, I remembered this TED talk. It's about the hidden influence of the social network, and it describes like a bit of what you have just explained. There's a diagram that shows the link between the individual and his network, and it's very, very interesting. Just
okay. Okay, so everybody copy that link and watch it later. The whole point of this, thank you, Dana. The whole point of this is that the characteristics, the structure, and the quality of the social network influences health outcomes. Okay, particularly in old age. So this is the convoy model of social relations is generally used in studies on aging, and studies on mental health in old age, and on functional decline, cognitive decline. It actually, study after study shows that the characteristics of the social relations as measured by the convoy model are actually very predictive of people's health outcomes in old age. Okay, so that's why it's mentioned. Okay, so this break, this is the tea break, our tea break. What do you know? Have you ever heard of yellow tea?
Yes, doctor. Is it the magical tea? We call it the magical tea in China. Sure. Because it has a lot of benefit for the skin, the diabetes, the management, the teeth. And I know that it's like green tea, but in the last stage of green tea, we do oxidation and steam. The leaves are left to be stamped.
Okay, great, good. I didn't know much about about yellow tea. Sorry, I know quite a bit about green tea, but yellow tea is a new revelation for me. So it is it's a delicacy, it's a rare tea as well, because the leaves, they pick the leaves that are inside, the smaller leaves that are inside the plant, and it's fermented more than green tea, slightly more than green tea. It is, yes, it is Chinese tea, but I also read that it's in Kenya as well. That Kenya is famous for having yellow tea as well. And Kenya has some very expensive, very exquisite teas as well, which is something that I also recently learned about. Okay, so explore yellow tea on your own, because I don't know much about it, but I thought, let me just introduce you to it. And if you're interested in it, you can explore it. So first there was black tea. And then people started to use green tea because of its health benefits. Well, I mean, the idea is that it's antioxidant, it has less caffeine, and then white tea came on the market, and now we have yellow tea. I don't know if there's going to be a different color of tea from now on. Okay. We have 15 minutes left. Let me show you some data, and then I'd like you to break into groups just to break the routine a little bit. This is a study that we are doing right now with older Syrian refugees. It's a study on tracking adherence to COVID-19 preventive measures among older Syrian refugees. It's a longitudinal study, and we're collecting data actually, it's a mini longitudinal study because the whole data collection phase is 9 months, but there are 4 waves of data. So we asked some questions about social networks. And this is some of the data here. This is just really just a small piece of the data. I only present data on person number 1. So let's say on average, every person in the study, and the sample is around 3,000. Every person in the study basically told us how many people are in their social network. And on average, people in this context have 9 people in their social network. And this is the data when we asked about the first person they put in that circle around themselves. 17% put their spouse as their first person in their social network. And these are older adults. 48%, almost half, put their son or daughter as the first person in their social network. 9% put a friend or a neighbor, someone outside the family. Now, 96.6% of the people, the first person they selected is a Syrian person. So they are Syrian, and almost everyone, their first person is also a Syrian living in Lebanon. For 40% of the sample, person 1 lives in the same household. And for 77.4% of the sample, they speak with that person on a daily basis. Okay. So these are, on the left side, these are measures of the structure, the quantitative measures of the structure of social networks. Then these are qualitative data. When we asked, with person 1, do you share private feelings with this person? 90% said yes, or strongly agree. Do you think this person would take care of you if you get sick? 86.8% said yes. Let me go to the last one. Do you think this person can give you advice when you need it? 89% said yes. Then we asked them, do you think this person can lend you money if you need it? But only 58.3% said yes. Okay. Let's break into groups. And what I would like you to do in your groups, and this is a short exercise, only 3 minutes. What I would like you to do is describe in very broad strokes, describe this type of social network. What does this data tell you about the social network? Okay. You can go back a couple of slides back and think about, proximity, intimacy, all of these measures that we talked about. Is this clear, or does anybody have questions? I think we lost 2 people. Look at 3, 3, 3. So let's do 4 groups, 2 to 3. Let's do 3 groups, 3 to 4 participants per group. Okay, so really just 3-4 minutes to like have a quick discussion to come back. Okay, I'm gonna open the rooms now. They're random. Was that enough time or no? No?
It was very quick, Doctor.
It was quick, yeah. I was hoping to give you more time, but okay. I went back to, yeah. Okay. So you've all discussed this first population, Syrian in Lebanon. Now, what I'd like you to look at here is another group of people, another population, where the average number of people in their social network is 3. There's no spouse here. Person number 1 is 3% of the time it's the mother, 38% it's the sister, 18% it's a friend. 93% are of the same nationality. 7% as opposed to 40.2% lives in the same household. And only 26.3% said that they speak with this person 1 on a daily basis. How would you describe, I know you talked about this group when you were in the breakout rooms. How would you describe the difference between these 2 groups?
Are they the same age group or not? Are they...
No, they're not.
Obviously they are not.
Yes.
Unless they are unmarried.
The range and the size are less. The homogeneity is less. The bondness seems less.
Okay, I'm glad you're using terms like homogeneity, bondness. Yes. Okay. So you think the population on the right, the homogeneity is less?
Yes.
Slightly less, like 3% less, but no, same nationality maybe.
Okay.
Yes, but the others, you can see that there is still other nationality and there is friends and neighbor. So the population number 2 didn't even get out of the family. This is what.
Sister. Yes. Okay. Well, here you have spouse, son, daughter, and then friend. Here you have mother, sister.
I didn't.
Okay.
In fact, I didn't see.
Lamia got disconnected, maybe.
Are they kids? Or not?
Are they kids?
Sorry, it's cutting.
Yeah.
I think there's also a difference in terms of the density, as well as when you also look at the level of closeness, like okay, I think Lamia talked about the bond, but the frequency of contact on the quality part of it. The other one, like, yes, 26%, they speak less as compared to the 77% who are more frequently like talking to each other.
Okay. Okay. So there's less frequent contact here in this population. Melody, I saw your hand up. Yes, thanks. Thanks, Isaac. Yeah, this is, yeah.
I feel like the population one, they are immigrant people, Syrian immigrant people. I think because they are very close to each other, like their first person is more about their family more than friends and neighbors. And also they said that 77 speaks, like they speak daily with each other. So I think their social network is very close to each other. So they are people who see them, who see each other daily. And 40% they live within the same household. So I think there are more immigrant people, or people who are living just together.
Okay.
This is what differs the two populations.
Okay, very, very good. Yeah, I mean, these are, this is, by the way, this is real data. This is simulated data. I made some of this up just to show you the contrast. This is, the idea is that these are women migrant workers. They're not refugees. And the women migrant workers, most are not married, or if they are married, maybe they left, they don't have a good relationship with the husband. So they didn't mention their husband or spouse in the first circle. Their strongest, most of person one is their sister, but then they also have friends in Lebanon. And these friends may be from their same country of origin, but they don't live with these friends in the same household, because many of them live in the employer's household. And they don't have a lot of access to these friends. Only 26% say that they speak with their friend, not the friends, I'm sorry, with sister, friend, mother. 26% said that they speak with them on a daily basis. Okay, so you can see when you look at the social networks, and I can put a third population here, which is Lebanese, which would look very different as well. Person number one may be different. The nationality, maybe the Lebanese would have people of other nationalities more in their social network. And maybe this will be almost 100% that with the first person that they select in their social network, it would be a person that they talk with on a daily basis, all the time. Okay, so these types of characteristics do distinguish groups of people depending on whether they are refugees, whether they're citizens, whether they're migrant workers, women, men, also by age. Older adults would mention their son, daughter a lot more than younger populations. So these are some of the things that we look at when we try to understand the relationship between a person's social network characteristics and their health outcome.
Doc, can I just
sure, go ahead.
Find out, like, okay, so when you're designing, let's say, studies of this sort, do you like, in terms of like the validation, do you speak, let's say one says in the first circle to say my mother is my the first person in my social network. Do you talk also to the mother, or you just get like the qualitative data from the respondent, him or herself, or you go and cross-check if whatever information they are providing is true and it can be validated?
Yeah, no, I don't. We don't collect data from the mother as well. We just collect data from the participant. And the participant would say, my first person, the most important person in my life is my mother. Others may say the most important is my spouse. Others may have a mother and a spouse, and they say, no, my son is the most important person in my life. And then you see here that sometimes the first person is a friend or a neighbor, and not a son or a spouse or a mother. So we don't know, we don't validate, but one of the interesting things that we look at sometimes is the differences by gender. And one of the things that we are out of time now, but one of the things we didn't get to a lot actually, which is fine, we had an interesting conversation early on. But one of the things that we would look at, I don't even show it here, and this is a finding that's actually in much of the research on social relations, where women, in fact, rely a lot less on, in old age particularly, women in their social relations and social support rely a lot less on their spouse than men. That men report their wife as number one in their social network a lot more than women report the husband as number one in their social network. And in many cases, women select their son or their daughter. Women, older adult women select their son and their daughter as number one a lot more than men, and men select their spouse as number one a lot more than women. So there's quite a bit of research also that marriage is good for men in terms of the social relations and mental health. Marriage is much better for men than it is for women, and sometimes women, select others in their social network as a source of, as the most important relationship and a source of social support. I don't have time to go over this, but actually this is interesting data. It's kind of simulated because the paper that I'm relying on is the analysis is a bit complex by one of my colleagues. But one final thing I wanted to mention is that there's this idea that was developed actually by people who worked in this region. Saad Joseph, Catherine Yount, and Jennifer Olmsted. The idea is called patriarchal connectivity. We may go back to this when we talk about feminism as a theoretical framework for health. Patriarchal connectivity and patriarchal bargain, the patriarchal bargain. And the idea here is that women in their young age, they kind of accept patriarchal social relations. They accept those even though these social relations are patriarchal and deprive women of resources, but they accept them because they actually gain from patriarchy later on in life when they are older. So Arab women expect in their old age to draw on the relationships with their husbands and their children to support themselves economically, socially, and psychologically. So it's sort of like it's presented as a bargain. So I accept things when I'm young because I'm going to benefit later on when I'm aging. So this has been developed, and it also explains somewhat why women rely a lot more on their children in old age compared to men, because it's part of a patriarchal bargain for children to take care of their mothers later on in life as they age. And that has implications for physical health, psychological health, economic well-being as well. Okay, I hope we can come back to this later, maybe not next week, but later, a couple of weeks later, when we talk about feminism and health outcomes. For now, try to go over these few slides at the end that we didn't go over. But just very quickly, we talked about the size and the structure and the characteristics of social networks. And these characteristics influence the nature of the social support that the person gets. So some of the questions about the quality of the qualitative aspects of the social network also very much run in parallel to social support. But the article talks in more depth about social support and how social networks and social support have impact people's health outcomes through social influences, through social engagement, and through the person's ability to access resources as well. And then at the end, it all boils down to basically how the meso level and the micro level in terms of our measures of social networks and social support influence people's behaviors, and how this behavior at the end impacts health outcomes. Okay. Sorry to rush through these last slides. They are important, but it's okay. Okay, we have some chat here. Let me stop sharing so I can have access to the chat. Oh. So Lamia, you said, and they don't live with them. This is normal? What were you referring to?
No, those are two comments at
earlier.
Yes, earlier. But
okay.
I was thinking about the example of women's list their children and men, their women. I think it's quite normal because women are nurturer per nature. So as soon as they get children, they give priority to children too. And as the men, in another hand, tend to how we say to rely on the woman a lot, on her because she take care of him.
Sure. Yes, and that's the, you know, that has been hypothesized as the reason why men, more than women, men need to marry again after they lose their spouse, because they've, you know, they're socialized into having a relationship with the woman. It's very difficult for them to live alone. I mean, of course, there are social taboos as well, you know, and what is acceptable socially or not, but there are also like psychological factors where it is easier for the woman to live after she loses her spouse, whereas for the man, they've, you know, there's this need, this emotional and psychological need to marry another woman, to be with another woman. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, next week we will talk about the fundamental cause of disease, and this is actually a theory or fundamental cause of health. This is a framework, not necessarily a theory, and a collection of writings that I'm very interested in. And, you know, I contributed to a paper on COVID where we looked at the fundamental causes of health and how, you know, the fundamental causes influence risk of COVID, risk of the infection, and also risk of severe illness due to COVID. But anyways, I won't talk about that and COVID. We will talk about a couple of other things related to the fundamental cause. So please start reading the first article by Phelan and Link. And then I will send you an email where there will be two articles, one on HPV, human papillomavirus vaccines, and then one on something related to public health nutrition. Okay? Okay, so good luck. I will start looking at your papers. I downloaded all of them. There's one of you who submitted it in PDF, and I emailed, I think, Sarah or Jenna. I emailed you, Jenna we lost Jenna. Maybe not Sarah, right? Anyways, whoever submitted the paper in PDF, please, you need to send it to me in Word format, okay? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you, doctor.
Bye.
Bye,
See you.
everyone.